The Considered Life by Stefan Boublil. Chapter 1. Birth. I used to have a long-winded introduction here. It was pretty good. I introduced myself to you along the lines of interminable sentences, inadequately and sometimes uncomfortably, attempting to present a person worthy of trust, while sprinkling biographical information about having forcibly sent to Catholic boarding schools while Jewish, arriving in New York City at 18 years old while French, and failing to become Orson Welles while me. See, I thought it was important for you to get to know me before trying to assure you of the reliability of my arguments for the next 245 pages, which is a lot of pages coming from somebody who, for all you know, might have been involved in countless hit and runs, and possibly had sex with your mom. Anyway, my editor didn't think it was necessary to preamble a book that aims to be, after all, for you, with a chapter about me. And even though I disagreed with him at first, I listened, ruminated, and finally consented. As the saying goes, there are two kinds of people in this world, right? The ones who understand literary structure and the ones who... Wait a minute. Fuck that. There are 6,602,224,175 kinds of people in this world, at last count. Each of us armed with a point of view slowly crafted by time and experiences. Each of us right and wrong, depending on context and circumstances. Each of us solely responsible for our opinions, right? In fact, it seems to me that the readily available cliché that conveniently separates the human race into any two camps we see fit to corroborate our reasoning is a false perspective at best, and a dangerous one at worst. Why ever bother generalize at all? Is there not enough room in the compendium of human behavior for all opinions, learned or guessed, to be catalogued and considered in their own right? Is there not enough time to willfully decide to try on all points of view, just to see how they feel? The fact is, there are countless opportunities to make choices during one lifetime. One every second, if not more. There are the decisions we are all familiar with, the jobs, the mate, the real estate, and we usually think that pondering these questions long and hard is an inarguable sign that a good decision is in progress, at the very least a thoughtful one. But what do we base that opinion on? What constitutes thoughtful, especially these days? Do duration and strain necessarily bring about true meaning? Have they ever? Does your final decision actually reflect your educated selection, or is it the result of repetitious rites that have seeped into the communal mind and made their home within the folds of yours? How can you be sure that your final choice is not idealism that has been pushed on you, like bags of glue on suburban white kids brought out of cities by benevolent parents who never saw boredom as the real danger, and who wrapped the values and opinions they wanted you to share in a gift box called love, which you would have been mad to question, let alone refuse? So you believe in their God, you trust that their vision of good and evil is irrefutable, and you do not put your elbows on the table, right? Then there is the community to which you have worked so very hard to belong, and to whom you feel, somehow, that you owe a debt of gratitude. You espouse its ideals as yours, you recycle, you marry the girl, you get pregnant at the prom, and you exercise 3 times a week for 20 minutes, right? It seems to me that the answer is a big bucket of who gives a shit, because the consequential part of this equation lies on neither side of the right-wrong debate, but on whether the decision was made by you or conveniently inherited from a set of pre-existing beliefs. And what about the smaller decisions, the ones you hardly ever pay attention to because you believe them to be instinctual? Whether you turn left, right, or go straight when on a fool's errand, whether to twitch your pinky toe when you find yourself waiting for that friend who's always late, whether to give that meatloaf one more chew with a conscious understanding that your stomach will be kinder to you if you do. How often do you ponder those questions? Right. The considered life, as I have come to name the process of questioning everything equally, is about putting this unbalance into action, examining the choices we make from moment to moment, and analyzing the causes and consequences of those decisions so that we may be certain they are ours alone, whether they are perceived to be important or not. This is self-consciousness, an empowerment lays within. Of course, this is fundamental and frankly rather basic, but most of us, believing this sort of contemplation built in, don't bother. We give up our right to choose and blame circumstances when disappointment strikes. What does self-consciousness actually entail? Well, it is most often confused with feelings at large, an awareness of the present that plays like a movie, and memories that we think belong to us, which leads us to clumsily name the whole thing me. That, objectively, is consciousness, built up by the aforementioned and coupled with our often peculiar, if not idiosyncratic, understanding of the world outside ourselves. Of course, all the elements contained within, from how you felt the first time you heard Nena expound on the various virtues of 99 Luftballons, to the fact that you kept maintaining that Windows is the best operating system out there, depend on a cultural context to exist, which, in turn, also affect consciousness. Adjustable and adaptable to any environment, consciousness seems like one fickle mistress. Therefore, and to my surprise, I cannot guarantee that I am, simply because I think. That Descartes. What an asshole, isn't he? Cogito ergo sum might be succinctly useful to the individual, but is too fluid, hence of little meaning to humanity's state of consciousness, something he really ought to have thought about. From where I sit, quite comfortably, there can be a couple of ways of looking at this. Consciousness can be understood, as it is by Descartes, as the thinking part of me, or, as it is by foxy Immanuel Kant, as the repository of all the things I'm conscious of. But would that not infer that when I am slowly lulled to sleep at night by Fresh 102 FM, I am no longer aware of myself and, as a result, no longer exist? Shit, consciousness is hard. In fact, why accept anyone's proposition? Why not define it ourselves? Who cares if you weren't born in 18th century Prussia, forbidden by the king himself from teaching religion due to your uncomfortably rationalist stance? The goal is to gain from this quest for meaning, and ultimately to be inspired by ourselves, for ourselves, especially if we cannot trust any of the self-appointed interpreters. Since we are the first generation to feel the true impact of our parents killing God, with Nietzsche's help, do you think it a coincidence that one of the most powerful and influential corporate entities that our generation has produced is a search company? So anxious are we to find a replacement for the senselessly murdered divinity that we are willing to make a commercial enterprise very rich on the hope that they may have an answer. Perhaps not explicitly, but the proof is, I have heard, in a pudding of some sort, and it is hard to deny Google's custardy consistency. An issue then arises, because belief in supernatural preordination was tentatively replaced with belief in the manufactured, which, since processed by and for humans, carries the unmistakable stench of mediocrity, hence cannot be trusted blindly as God once was. We have actually not yet found how to replace this God with anything or anyone adequate and up to the challenge. And so we search, mostly outside of us. But is it possible that a simple mirror could tell us more than a set of holy books? And even if your God survived the late century blitzkrieg, is it not reasonable to believe that you might have had a hand in its persistence? 6,602,224,175 people. How can we possibly pretend that there exists but one set of rules that might explain, nay, regulate, human consciousness as a whole? With so many humans alive on Earth, is it not reasonable to expect as many ways to think? Why do so many writers, theists, and other pundits try to convince us of the universal validity of their version? And seeing as we buy the books, attend the services, and listen to them talk, I wonder how most of us were convinced that one truth for all was indeed possible, even desirable. One standard for or against which we divide into two camps or not concedes too much to the convenient but fictional concept of the perfectibility of man, to an ideal drilled into our skulls that there may be such a dreadful thing as a best way to be, which we shall aspire to. In fact, projective and objective, we must all gravitate toward and contribute to one perfect version of the future. Seems more selfish since unfulfillable than its alternative, attempting to live well oneself. Sadly, a pursuit of truth, that which finally unifies all sentient beings happily under one explanation of life, has little to no value, for it will only ever remain a good intention as long as we insist on individual freedom. And I do not believe that good intentions are of much consequence, literally. Only goals pursued or not. We desperately want to be better, for we have been told in no uncertain terms by those self-anointed that we are not as good as we should be, which is why we follow iconic figures of the past and present to the end of the earth or cable programming grids. But whether we're reading the Bible or O Magazine, we must understand that both demand trust as if it were a commodity, unearned, and one that may or may not be a sound investment. We must stop worshiping idols and start finding out about ourselves. As you will find, I'm quite wary of concepts such as truth, words such as ultimate, or the process of finding one's path. Wary because we cannot know if these goals are attainable. Truth is not a fair concept to apply to our lives, for we are not each dealt a similar deck with which to play, making it unjustifiable to apply one man's truth to another. That is why I listen to my editor, because his truth may be more valuable than mine concerning the cogency of this presentation. We collectively too speedily agree to agree on the foundation of a standardized truth without ever wondering about our own. And when we come to expect something as significant as our identity to be defined by such agreement, we give away control as we inevitably transfer power to context instead of making use of it. This is why I attempt to live a considered life, pausing long enough in the moment to consider my actions, and only then making a decision based on the prologue that my life constitutes, and the impact it might have on my present and, if I'm lucky, future, near and far, as well as that of those around me. This is what we are all about, people. Let us look in and out of ourselves and find a relationship between the two, so that finally an honest person might hatch, seemingly out of nowhere. Not necessarily a good person, not an especially ethical person, neither particularly principled or upright, law-abiding or even high-minded. I simply said honest. And not even honest with other people, just with oneself. All of these other qualities are mere judgments of character, something the considered life has no interest in, since you are in charge at all times. You make the rules. The journey to self-knowledge commands honesty of the highest degree, that very same which obliged Mother Teresa to confess her doubts, the same that feeds unstoppable ambition, the same that doesn't care for aimless chit-chat at useless cocktail parties. Living life is more than mere chemistry. It is something you can willfully and hopefully create. It is not something that happens to you, but a promise that you fulfill. The essence of the considered life is action, your ability to use and not lethargically rely on circumstance. When I was a teen, an epic story of acne and hope senselessly redacted, my predictable search for the meaning of my life led me to mistakenly seek pure objectivity. But I later realized the more formidable and worthy goal was actually stubborn subjectivity. This is no mystery. This is no magic trick. If you do not unlock self-consciousness, it doesn't exist. Now, as pitiful egomaniacs of my sort are wont to do, I often think about legacy and have to admit I do not come up with much in the way of talent, money or hose to bestow my naive and innocent children by the time I go. All I may have is the knowledge of the principles I have found to be true for me, an analysis of the opinions I have had, a tentative understanding of the man I am, now, 40 years old, and possibly never again at the convergence of the time already spent learning and the time yet to spend discovering more. Now is the portrait I would like to draw of myself for them to go back to, someday, when they suddenly, or not, give a shit about who I thought I might have been. This book is a systematic deconstruction of my considerations about various subjects which have percolated to the top of my mind in the past 4 decades. On a quest to own myself, I now feel ready to be who I am and pass it on, for informational purposes only, and perhaps lead by the example not of where I landed, but how I got there, in this, a diary of sorts, to be one day opened by the aforementioned. Or you. Shall we?